Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, graphic novel published in 2020. And it is, yes, the George Takei we know as Sulu in Star Trek. An absolutely fantastic graphic novel. And I have covered some elements of the Japanese internment on this channel before. I've done a review of No No Boy by John Okada. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card. We'll get to what no no means later in this review. But I'm so impressed by not only the artwork, but how Takei tells the story. He tells it with no hatred, no resentment, just a desire to be understood and to educate people. And we should address at the outset, does a nation have a right to restrict citizenship to race, for example? Yes. People, I think, especially in this period, are brainwashed by America, Canada, Australia, these propositional nations in which citizenship is about moving somewhere, getting a job, and then applying for citizenship. And that citizenship has nothing to do with your race or your connection to the land. Countries are free to do as they wish. If Canada wants to do that, and Australia wants to do that, and America wants to do that, that's fine. On the other side of the table, you have countries like Myanmar and Uruguay that do not offer naturalized citizenship. You could live in Uruguay for 50 years. You're not eligible for citizenship as a non-native of Uruguay. That's their right. You don't have to like it, but there's nothing inherently immoral or racist about such a policy. There's just a preference of a country. If the citizens of that country have that preference, there it is. No one is entitled to citizenship just because you move somewhere. No one owes you anything. I'm saying that as a two-time immigrant. Having lived in France for 10 years, France doesn't owe me citizenship. It's something they can choose to do, choose to give me for any number of reasons. However, what is racist and unjust is saying that ethnically Japanese U.S. citizens could have their property confiscated and they could be put into concentration camps in World War II, but that didn't happen to German or Italian citizens. And here America has to come to grips with the, let's say, Caucasian preferences of citizenship, which, again, if you want to do that, that's fine. You just need to put it into law. And America never did that with the Caucasian races, but they did do that with the Asian races. The Chinese Exclusion Act, I think, happened in the 1880s. Chinese nationals were explicitly excluded from citizenship. And then later on, this would devolve into Japs being U.S. citizen Japs, by the way, interned, having their property confiscated, and being inherently suspicious simply because they're Japanese. It didn't matter if they were born in America, raised there, went to college there, served in the military. You're suspicious because you're a Jap. And it took decades for this to be reversed, for America to finally pay reparations, frankly, token reparations compared to what was actually lost by the Japanese during this time. But as I say, Takei does not tell that story with hatred, rancor, anger. He really just wants to educate. He really just wants to educate people, and doing it in this comic book format. I'll try during the review to show you some of this, is to try to educate people of school age and hopefully some of the older kids as well who probably don't know anything about this part of history as to what actually happened. So we'll start at the very beginning talking about some of the attitudes. In California at that time, the single most popular political position was lock up the Japs. The Japanese situation as it exists in this state today may well be the Achilles heel of the entire civilian defense effort. Unless something is done, it may bring about a repetition of Pearl Harbor. The Attorney General of California, Earl Warren, decided to get in front of that issue. And Fletcher Bowron, the mayor of Los Angeles, testified before Congress that we were non-assimilable. They are Japanese and nothing else, regardless of how many generations may have been born in America. Undoubtedly, many of them intend to be loyal, but when the final test comes, who can say but that blood will tell? We cannot run the risk of another Pearl Harbor episode. You see this testimony. But there's no question here, why would that not apply to Germans? Do Germans not love their homeland, where their relatives are? Do Italians? I mean, how many times do you run into an Italian American, they don't let you forget that they have connections to Italy? But this idea of blood will tell, that they could never, why would the Japanese not be assimilable, but the Italians and the Germans were? Why were they not suspected? You can draw your own conclusions, but it's right there in front of you. Can believe your lying eyes. And here's a picture of FDR signing Executive Order 9066. The order never used the word Japanese or camps. It authorized the military to declare areas from which any or all persons may be excluded, and to provide transportation, food, shelter, and other accommodations to persons excluded from those areas. 10 days later, the entire West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington, and even Arizona was declared a military area. And so if you were here, and you were Japanese, even if you were American citizens, you had to be deported to another part. The Takeis would go to Arkansas and other places, but they would eventually make their way back. But this was the exclusion zone because you would help the Japanese forces come in and take over the place where you lived. Pretty quickly, we go to the internment, and Takei talks about the injustices that happened. The bank accounts were frozen. People were selling things for pennies on the dollar. People were taking advantage of the Japanese, and sometimes the women couldn't take it. The Japanese women, they would smash their own dishes rather than sell it for pennies on the dollar. Perfectly understandable. Each family was assigned a horse stall, still pungent with the stink of manure, and George has a picture of himself saying, "We get to sleep where the horses slept. Fun." And that's what's so magical about this is you get to see this through the eyes of a child experiencing it, and you can see how some of it felt like an adventure, but now being able to see it with distance and with him as an adult narrating it to you, you're able to see just how terrible a lot of this was. As a kid, I couldn't grasp the injustice of the situation. So here they're put onto trains and they're given numbers. We were loaded onto trains headed east, but not before being tagged to keep track of us like cattle. These tags are to be worn at all times. And here he again as a child on a train. I thought everyone took vacations on a train with armed sentries at both ends of the car. It was an adventure. And he's not being sarcastic, he really felt this way as a kid. And when they were going through towns, the Japanese couldn't be visible. That would scare the white people. Whenever we would approach a town, we were forced to draw the shade, and the soldiers come. We were not to be seen by the townspeople. My brother and I were innocent children not fully comprehending our situation. We thought that this was the way things happened. Don't scare the Caucasians with the Japanese U.S. citizens coming through town. So now they're at the internment camp, and the mom had brought a sewing machine, even though they had been specifically told not to bring sewing machines. And, and you can see the father, "You brought that?" And she says, "I did not want to leave it behind. And children going to be needing new clothes." So Takei's dad had grown up in America, but his mom had grown up in Japan, so he replicates some of her non-native English speaker cadence and speech. He says, "You knew this was forbidden." "I know, but children be needing new clothes." And then they laugh about it, and you knew this was forbidden. And they didn't understand that the parents were laughing at their, you could say, act of disobedience. Of all things, it was over a sewing machine. Now we see some crossover. I'm pretty sure that I shared with you all, if you had a chance to watch on my Palestine, well, it's not on my Palestine Bookshelf channel, it's actually on this channel. They Called Me a Lioness by Ahed Tamimi. And she talks about growing up and playing Jews and Arabs that as a sort of cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians game. And you think, wow, children, they have to find a way to be joyful and to play around. And they would take something like this and play Arabs versus Jews or the IDF. And some of them would play as journalists or medics. And you really just have to step back and say, this is how children are coping with a traumatic situation. Well, guess what they were doing in the internment camps? They were playing Japs versus Americans. And here you have Japanese children. "Die, you Japanese cowards. Bang, bang, bang. He got me, I'm dead. Gotcha again. America wins the war. Let's play again, but this time I'll be American. The older boys would play war. Nuh-uh, you be Japanese, I'm American. No fair, you're always American. It was like cowboys and Indians, but Japanese and Americans instead. Children find ways to process trauma in ways that for us as adults we find unbelievable, but in a way makes a lot of sense. And so seeing that happen, and I remember, I think Navajos wear Nikes. I never did that review for this channel, but he talks that they played cowboys and Indians on Indian reservations as well. It's really fascinating. So here we get to questions 27 and 28, very famous. That's how we get the book No No Boy. To determine our loyalty, the War Relocation Authority and the Army distributed mandatory questionnaires to all adults in the camps. Everyone over the age of 17 must fill this out. They asked about relatives in Japan, criminal records, membership in organizations, foreign investments, even magazine reading habits. But two questions in particular became infamous. Number 27. Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty wherever ordered? 28. Will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any or all attack by foreign or domestic forces, and forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese Emperor, to any foreign government, power, or organization? Now, some of you may say, well, Stephen, why can't you just say yes? I thought you were talking about them being loyal citizens. Pause for a moment and just listen to some context from the Japanese. All 10 camps exploded with outrage over these loyalty questionnaires. My parents answered no to both questions 27 and 28. This earned them the dubious label of no-nos. Question 27 wanted us to pledge our lives for a country that had upended our families and put us behind barbed wire fences. Question 28 rested on a false premise, that we all had a racial allegiance to the Emperor of Japan. To answer yes would be to agree that we all had such a loyalty to give up. Yes or no, either response would be used to justify our wrongful imprisonment, as if they'd been right to call us enemy aliens and lock us up in the first place. So you can see the logic there. And here's this beautiful side-by-side of his father and his mother. My father was raised in America, but had been born in Japan. Like all Asian immigrants, he was forbidden from applying for U.S. citizenship. Question 27 asked him to serve in combat for a country that had rejected and then imprisoned him because of his ethnicity. He was 40 years old with a wife and 3 young children. Question 28 asked him to discard his entire Japanese heritage, relatives, memories, and the place of his birth for a country that would not have him. Answering yes would make him stateless. For my mother, question 27 was absurd, but question 28 caused her great frustration. She was an American-born citizen, and all her children were Americans. She was married to a man her country rejected and now called an enemy alien. Her country took everything her family had, put them behind fences in this hot Arkansas swamp, and now she was expected to put family second to a nation that had rejected them. Great points. Now, some people fought. On the other hand, some young Nisei, and so when we're thinking of names, Issei are Japanese-born, and then they move to America. Nisei are American-born. On the other hand, some young Nisei decided to answer yes, yes. They too found the questions outrageous, but they bit the bullet and swallowed the bitter taste. Here was an opportunity to fight for America, the country of their birth, and to prove their patriotism, as no other Americans were asked to do. So he then talks about the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. We'll come back to them a little later, because great story associated with them. Very, very brave, very heroic. President Truman honored dozens of its members with the Distinguished Service Cross. You fought not only the enemy, but you fought against prejudice, and you have won. Now, the Distinguished Service Cross, to understand, it's still a very high award, but it's the second highest honor that could have happened. Many years later, the government recognized their incredible heroism with an upgrade to the Congressional Medal of Honor. America owes an unpayable debt to you. And part of that idea was they couldn't receive the Medal of Honor because they were Japanese. And so even though they'd served with honor, they'd served with distinction, had worked heroically, they Here he's mentioning Senator Daniel Inouye, who lost his arm in combat in Italy, that they couldn't possibly receive the Medal of Honor. And so you see, it takes many, many years later. President Clinton, this would have been during the 90s, and they fought during World War II. Took half a century for their recognition to come. And this is something that Takei is quite hopeful of throughout the book, that it takes a long time, some time, but justice does come. But here, too, he recognized the rightness of his parents to say no, no. He recognized the rightness of the soldiers of the 442nd to say yes, yes. Many other young men took a very different stance on the issue. I am willing to fight, but I will only fight as an American. If I can sign up at my hometown draft board, like any American, with my family free, I will gladly go. But I will not leave my family locked up behind barbed wire fences to go put on the same uniform as the sentries in those towers. In 1944, dozens of these principled objectors were transferred to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas. You can see them here behind bars. I'm proud of them, and I consider them just as heroic as those who fought on foreign battlefields. Though they responded in different ways, caring for their families, fighting on the battlefield, or serving time for their principles, all these Japanese Americans showed incredible courage and heroism. They proved that being American is not just for some people. They all made difficult choices to demonstrate their patriotism to this country, even when it rejected them. And all of these responses, I think Takei rightfully notes, are heroic. It's an absurd, crazy situation that as citizens, you would be put up in concentration camps because Japs are suspicious. Germans and Italians, not suspicious. Japs, they're suspicious. And yet, some of them responded by going into combat, some of them responded by being willing to serve jail time, and others just simply stayed behind and worked with their families. Incredible. Very admirable. If you're enjoying this content, you might not be enjoying the what is actually happening. But if you're enjoying learning about this, please consider hitting like, subscribe. It's a free, easy way to learn about the channel, and it's a way for you to make sure you get notified of future videos on the channel, which you might also like. Here again, we see some resonance with the Palestinian issue. And I say that because, many people are familiar with the Nakba, which happened in 1948, but there was also a Naksa, which happened in 1967. And the kids who were old enough they were probably, let's say, 4 or 5 years old in 48. By 67, they were having heated conversations with their parents, asking, why did you leave? You should have stayed and fought. And again, we see this same conversation happening with Takei. You're older, you're judging your parents, why didn't you stay and fight? If I had been there, I would have stayed and fought. And there's two things going on here. One, this parallel with the 48 expulsion in Palestine and the internment camps in the 40s in America, the same reactions happening. But also a reminder that we are so quick to judge our parents for the choices they made at our wise age of 17, 18, 20, 24. And it isn't until we get to be our parents' age that we realize sometimes not only the wisdom of what they chose, but sometimes the inevitability of what they chose. So here he's painting himself, I think, as a teenager. I would have protested. It was wrong. I would have organized my friends. We would have protested and done everything we could to stop it. That's the trouble with the Japanese. We're too passive. Someone should have spoken up and protested. And here's his father speaking very calmly. Yes, I can imagine you doing that, but I had the family to think about. You'll understand someday. When I grow up, is that it? Well, I am grown up, and I do understand. And you can see how angry he is. Daddy, you led us like sheep to slaughter and into a barbed wire prison. I mean, imagine how deeply those words would have cut to George Takei's father. And he says, maybe you're right. I spoke up righteously as my father suffered in silence. It still pains me to this day, that arrogant boy's outspoken bluntness inflicted on his father, a man who knew the anguish of those dark internment years more intensely than that boy could ever understand. So remember, he was a kid. He thought he was on an adventure, and there was no intellectual burden for him as it was for his father, grappling with nationality, grappling with a country that rejected him, imprisoned him. And I haven't had a chance to really even talk about, because there's so much to cover, and as we do in so many of these book reviews, we're trying to give an outline, not go step by step to the entire story. But his father was an organizer, was always elected to help people deal with issues, take care of food, access to library books, healthcare, all these. His father was that person you could count on in the camp. Well, if you don't think it could get worse, it got worse. One of the most painful and complicated issues to arise from the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans was set in motion. A bill that would expatriate certain persons who have openly avowed their disloyalty to the United States and have disclaimed loyalty to the United States, although they were born in this country. H.R. 4103 was drafted by Attorney General Francis Biddle. The bill gave us the right to give up our rights as U.S. citizens. If we did, we would officially become the enemy aliens they already believed us to be. It passed by a vote of 111 to 23 in the House. This is February 1944. 4 months later, the bill came before the Senate and passed there as well. Here, a Democrat from Georgia says, this bill will grant an opportunity for individuals who feel loyalty to the emperor to renounce their citizenship so that the United States will be able to deport them. They needed to follow the law in order, because you can't deport a U.S. citizen. On July 1st, 1944, Public Law 78405 was signed by the president, and we now had the right to become enemy aliens. And his mom, without real advice and in a panic, decides to do that because she thinks that's how we can keep our family together. Father couldn't have citizenship. She would renounce and then keep the children, and then they would go back. However, thankfully, San Francisco lawyer Wayne Collins challenged Order 9066 all the way up to the Supreme Court. With the war over and the camp shutting down, suddenly everything had changed. And he says you can no more resign citizenship in time of war than you can resign from the human race. And he leads this appeal and gets this deportation stopped, which I think is helpful. Here we are in 2025, and we have legal residents of the U.S., green card holders, law-abiding residents being deported because they dared to criticize another country that has nothing to do with the United States. And that country will remain unnamed, but everybody knows what we're talking about. Because who knows, if you can deport legal residents, at some point you may pass a law to deport U.S. citizens. I don't put that out of the realm of possibility. These are the times we're living in when you can have a doctoral student from Tufts, grabbed by 6 thugs and put into a van and attempt to get her deported. I don't see why U.S. citizens holding unacceptable positions may one day be put into the same situation. We'll be put to Guantanamo. They'll say, well, we're not deporting you. We're just sending you to another part of the United States and for suspicion. They did it to these people. Why couldn't they do it to us? So now Takei talks us through, and I didn't know any of this stuff about George Takei. Despite whatever other opinions he has and other positions he holds, I'm in admiration of the life that he and his family led and how they survived. So they're homeless now. They lost their house. The camps are closed, so they have to start over. And they lived on Skid Row for a while. They lived in different places, just trying to survive. We were living among derelicts and drunkards. I remember the stench of urine all over on the street, in the alley. It was a horrible experience for us kids. They're showing a junkie throwing up. Wow. Incredible. And here he's documenting what happened with 1988. This would have been Reagan. So showing the recognition that the United States was wrong here. August 10th, 1988, my fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race, and for these 120,000 were Americans of Japanese descent. The legislation that I'm about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 surviving Japanese Americans of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law. It was not until 1991 that I received a letter of apology with a check for $20,000 signed by George H.W. Bush. As my father would say, the wheels of democracy turn slowly. It took a while, but it did apologize. That apology came too late for my father. He passed in 1979, never to know that this government would admit wrongdoing. And what about that Executive Order 9066? Well, that would finally be recognized as well by the Roberts Supreme Court in 2018, June of 2018, in a case called Trump versus Hawaii, which is on another subject, which we can talk about another time potentially. But it said Korematsu was gravely wrong the day it was decided, rules Supreme Court. So it took however many years, and so you see all of these mechanisms in place, finally recognizing. And apparently America is this great enlightened place, but why did it take so many decades? Why did it take 50 years to recognize that racially profiling people who were US citizens and putting them in internment camps, but not putting Germans or Italians into the same camps for the same suspicions? It still took 50 years for that recognition. Of course, I'm happy for that recognition. I'm happy for the apology, all of those things, but it's a chapter of US history that is never taught. I was barely taught about it, and that was only because I was in AP US history, which is a higher level of US history you'll find in American high schools. But even then, we didn't really talk about it much. It certainly wasn't covered on the exam. And I would argue most Americans don't even know this ever happened. As you know, Americans, we don't study our history anyway, but we certainly don't study this sort of thing, which is shameful history, which a lot of American history is. Discussion for another time. But fantastic, something that I think can be read. I would say maybe 12-year-old children and above are going to have the context and understanding. The graphic novel format makes it really easy. Adults can appreciate it too because you have documentation in the back, different artifacts that he offers, maps, some of his family photos as well. It's an extraordinary work. So glad to have found out about it, and I hope that you take the opportunity to read it yourself. If you don't decide to buy it, find it at your local library. If you do decide to buy it, please use the link in the description below. It's one of the ways that you can support this channel. A free way you can support this channel is by hitting like, subscribe, sharing this with people who would like to know more about this, or you think would like to know more about this. If you'd like to thank me for this video particularly, consider sending a Buy Me a Coffee or a PayPal. There are links to that in the description. If you'd like to support on an ongoing basis, get early access to videos like this one, talk with me behind the scenes, get videos that are member exclusive, you can join Patreon or YouTube membership. If you'd like to nominate a future book for me to review, my Amazon wish list is also linked below. Pick through. You're going to see there's two different types of books. There's books about Palestine, that's for Palestine Bookshelf, obviously. But if you see anything that's not about Palestine, that's for this channel. Pick something out, send it my way, nominate it effectively, sponsor that video, and I will add it to my queue and review it when I have the opportunity. Until next time, enjoy your reading.